Chair and Madam Speaker, my task is very simple. I've been asked to introduce our only daughter by the name of Dr. Privalo Krika. Dr. Privalo Krika is an UF Deputy Representative in South Africa since January 2015. Based in Pretoria, she is responsible for the overall leadership and management guidance of the policy direction and program development and implementation in support and national development priorities. She brings almost 20 years of experience in child rights, development, emergency operation to this position. Having previously held a number of policy, strategic planning and program management posts with UNICEF since 1996 in New York, Geneva, Balkans region during the post-Kosovo crisis, including the deputy representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Prior to joining the UNICEF, she worked in the private sector as a research associate in consulting firms specialized in economics of competition, regulations, and other public policies. Dr. Krika was born and grew up in St. Petersburg, Russia. In addition to her PhD from the Maastricht University, she graduated School of Governance and Policy Analysis. She holds a Juris Doctor in Law from Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law in New York. A Bachelor of Art Economics with honors from Barnard College in Columbia University in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give the platform to our doctor.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. The Honorable Minister, the Deputy Director General, dignitaries, members of the board of the NACCW, all protocol observed, and all participants here today. First of all, I want to, I'm very honored that the organizers of the conference invited UNICEF to present. And I'm actually intimidated to be representing UNICEF in front of such wealth of experience and knowledge and passion and commitment, which is, the air is seeped through. I'm very humbled before you, and I hope that I can make at least a tiny contribution to your thinking and to your discussions during this conference. So what I would like to do is to talk about violence against children in South Africa and prioritizing prevention. The presentation I will focus on 4 areas, and I will briefly outline why we should focus on violence against children, what are the risks and contributory factors, what do we know works, and what approaches work in tackling violence, and I will end with a number of concluding remarks. Why focus on violence? I think the data that we have, and we all acknowledge that we don't have good statistics, but it paints a very concerning picture of the situation of children in South Africa. We know that the homicide rates for children are almost double the global rates, and we know that also almost 3/4 of the child homicides are a result of abuse and neglect. If we look at some of the gender desegregation, what we do know from the studies that have been done in South Africa is that there are more girl deaths linked to abuse and neglect, while adolescents, and primarily boys, and you can see the 2 spikes, and the spike on your right is adolescents and primarily boys die as a result of interpersonal violence including outside of the home, including related to gang violence. What do we know about the scale and nature of violence against children? Well, according to statistics collected by the South African police, there are about 123 violent crimes per day against children, and 44% of that are sexual offenses. Also, what we know is that out of all the sexual abuse reported, almost half of that is targeted to children, and over 60% to children under 15, and almost 30% to children under 11. Despite that, what we also know is that there are no national estimates, and that there's actually, studies have been done that there is serious underreporting, that only 1 in 9 cases are actually reported to the police. There's only administrative data available, which is really insufficient to fully understand the patterns of victimization and perpetration, especially when the data is not disaggregated by age or gender or sex. There is also lack of systematic research on the extent and range of violence experienced by children. There are no national surveys on violence against children. And there's lack of central mechanism to regularly monitor the data on violence against children across the different sectors. Now, that in itself may not, although it convinces me, probably you, it may not convince why we should focus on violence against children. But I think that the key point is that the impact of violence against children is devastating. And we know that the impact is long-lasting, and it can last a lifetime. It includes learning difficulties, poor school performance, loss of esteem and depression, which leads to many risky behaviors and self-harm. It also, witnessing violence also causes similar distress in that children who grow up in a violent environment or who directly experience violence are more likely to repeat and become the perpetrators of violence. But beyond the tragic effects on the children, on the individuals and families, the violence against children also carries serious economic and social costs in terms of loss potential and reduced productivity. So what do we know about risks and contributory factors to violence? There's been a study that has been recently done by the University of Cape Town on the structural equation modeling on the structural causes and determinants of violence against women and children. I'm not going to try to walk you through the very complex regression results, but basically the study has looked at the risk and contributory factors to victimization, but also to perpetration. What are the contributory factors that makes individuals to perpetrate violence? The bottom line is that the factors are very similar. They're almost identical. And the key factors, risk factors that contribute to children becoming victims or later becoming perpetrators of violence include living in households with only one parent, living in chronic poverty, being exposed to family temper conflict, living in households where there's regular consumption of alcohol and drugs. And an additional factor which contributes to perpetration of violence or to children becoming perpetrator is around communities, is around the environment, is around where they're living in the communities where violence is normalized. One of the things that was identified, of course, as a high risk factor, who are the children who are at risk of becoming either victims or perpetrators, are the children living in households with one parent. And if you look at the data we have on the living conditions of children in South Africa, it's incredibly high number of children actually do not live with both parents. The majority of children live with one parent or with neither parent, and there's a high number of orphans. And that just gives you the scale of vulnerabilities of children within their communities. Tackling violence. What do we know that seems, and I say seems because we have a lot of evidence of what works in different contexts that we consolidate, but you know, this is social science is not like biology, where you don't have you know, exact effects. You're really working on the basis of practical knowledge of what works, which has been consolidated and tested. So what do we know what works? This is a so-called socio-ecological model, which was originally designed by the Center for Disease Control. But it basically it illustrates that the violence is a multidimensional phenomena, and it needs to be tackled in a multidimensional way. And if you look, there are different, at the center of it, at the core, is really the individual child and the family and the community. And the family strengthening and building life skills of children is really key to prevention of violence, to addressing the risks. Within that framework, if you were to break it down into what areas do we need to focus on, do we need to invest? Well, the first one is targets and monitoring and evaluation. We need to have concrete targets for reduction of violence against children across the different sectors and at the national level. And at the same time, establish the monitoring evaluation mechanisms in order to monitor progress. But the narrowing the data gap is also about taking stock of the vast experience that is already available, that is already there, rather than multiplying and making more studies and interventions and projects. So it's really building on what you are already doing. The second is leadership. Leadership is critical at the national, local level, and in terms of coordination. It is really about forging an architecture that brings about at all levels, at the community, family, individual, policy, the kind of discourse that behavior changes will generate, the national awareness and commitment, and systemic actions needed to put into scale, and in order to scale up to the good initiatives, which we know are already there on the ground. Victim support, of course, is critical in terms of identification, care, and support. And already in South Africa, there are a number of excellent examples and models which the other countries in the region are looking towards in terms of victim care and support. The prevention, of course, is key, because the whole point is not to have to get to the point of victim support. You don't want the children to go to the Tutuzela care centers. You want to start before it happens. What we do know, and the evidence in qualitative and some quantitative evidence beginning to emerge, is that focus on families, preventing, and home visitation programs are really key. They are the key to that primary prevention and identification of risks, and helping the families and communities to address those risks. That combined with building life skills of children and adolescents, how to manage, how to address those risks themselves, are the two things which are critical. But in addition, what also I want to emphasize is that there is a link between the social protection and child protection. And while sort of the family access to social protection schemes, if they are better linked to the child protection outcome, can really be sort of a situation of the total being much more than the sum of its separate parts. So already today, the Child Support Grant reaching 11 million children and their families, And there's a wide range of impact evaluations and studies that reveal that there are positive effects of the grant in making poverty reduction efforts. So while it's absolutely critical that the communities and families are lifted out of poverty, it is important to recognize that patterns of social exclusion are often very complex and do not only include income deprivation. So vulnerable families receiving grants could also benefit from support of qualified social professionals, the child and youth care workers, auxiliary social workers, who together with them can identify the protection risks and vulnerabilities, including domestic violence, substance abuse, neglect, through vulnerability assessments, and put together improvement plans, which then can be implemented with regular supervision and monitoring by social welfare force. In addition, what I also want to emphasize is really the need for the gender transformative approach to family support. The statistics do tell us that over 40% of child abuse cases are sexual abuse. And there have been a number of qualitative studies done in South Africa on the motivations of perpetrators, in order to understand also what is it that motivates the perpetrators to assault children in a sexual way. And the results, what they show us is that it either is related to the sexual abuse of children is motivated by anger or form of punishment, but worryingly, about a third of rapes actually were explained by boredom, and most commonly, rape has been perpetrated out of sense of sexual excitement. Now, what that shows to us that positive parenting and support for children is not necessarily going to address the complexity of the issues that we're grappling with. So what we really need to address is transformation of the behavior, attitudes, social relations, as well as structural forces and relations that create and sustain very harmful or oppressive forms of masculinities. And a number of commentators have called the situation in South Africa as a crisis of masculinity. Now, what does gender transformative means? It means that we recognize that the gender is about men and women. It's about gender relations which we're socialized in. And it's a particular construction of men or masculinity and femininity which is based on very oppressive power dynamics which need to be addressed. Now, we already have a very great examples in South Africa, that despite many challenges and many in a gap between policy, rhetoric, and practice, of communities, of civil society organizations, getting men involved into this discourse, in working at the community level to address these issues. And this is something which does need to be brought into the home as well. So from the communities to the families and to the individuals. So in conclusion, my conclusion would be, where would we focus to invest in preventing violence? I think South Africa is already well positioned to achieve significant reduction. With a bit more precise targeting, there's a strong leadership and commitment from particularly the Department of Social Development to address the challenges. But if I was to highlight what would be the 3 things that would really make a difference for children in South Africa. One, I would say we must cover the basics first. Scope the problem by improving data on prevalence, trends, and outcomes. And the administrative data could be improved at the different levels, and some national outcome targets, if they were set, could actually drive the focusing and gathering of the relevant data. The second is to give children a voice. The voices, experiences, and rights of children are not very visible in anti-violence policy right now. The focus on gender is important, but motivations for violence towards children are not all gender-driven. Babies and children, girls and boys, are targets for violence because they are vulnerable developmentally, and they depend upon caregivers for survival and protection. And if you look at the statistics and the number of child homicides that happen in the home are about 34% of all homicides. And that, of course, it does affect girls more. They're about 46% of girls and 28% of boys. But still, we must acknowledge that families, is a place of protection, but also is a place of violence. So the question is, in that context, do children have an effective national platform for their views to be heard and acted upon? So it's really important for the different stakeholders, for the government, for the civil society organizations to lead by example, to get the children's voices heard. And finally, of course, we must look to the future by investing into the well-being of the next generation, by supporting children in families. There are both, and as I mentioned, families which are both a source of risk and a source of protection for children. And the research evidence shows that family support, home visitation, and programs to support parenting are effective in preventing and responding to violence. And that also the robust social protection system linked to child protection will make even greater difference in this endeavor. The gender violence will not be ended without stopping violence in the next generation, without supporting parents and women struggling in poverty and adversity, and without changing the cultures of masculinity that favor aggressive sexual violence over responsibility, care, and respect. So the child protection program, really, and the child protection starts with prevention and early detention. And of course, detection. And of course, we already have excellent model in Isibindi and in the work that you are doing on the ground in paving the way. And so, the way that I would think and that I see you as the child and youth care workers are the pioneers of the child protection and in the efforts of ending violence against children. Thank you.
Can we give Dr. Kricha another hand of applause? Doctor, we just want to say to you, thank you very much. Your inputs, your valuable contribution is well taken care of and very much acknowledged.
Thank you.
With this gift, we want to say to you, celebrate the birthday with us and for the work that you have done for us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I am going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Tom Gafford. Dr. Tom Gafford has been a child and youth care worker for the past 40 years. He worked with troubled children and families. Dr. Tom Gafford is a child and youth care worker, and as a child and youth care worker, he worked in emergency placement programs for adolescents. Later, he also worked as the director of a community-based family counseling program where he taught child and youth care workers, and families at the University of Victoria. Tom also worked as a director of a treatment center in Canada, which was the largest child and youth care agency in Montreal. He holds a PhD degree. I invite you to this platform to come and share your experiences with us.
Oh, I see. Here's a clicker. Good. I'll figure this out as we go along, I guess. Madame Ministre, it is an honor to be in your presence. I was there once before when you made a commitment to child and youth care workers, and I'm here today after that commitment has been fulfilled. I wish you would come to our country and teach our politicians how to support child care workers. My name is Tom, and I am a child care worker. I have always been a child care worker. I think I might have been born a child care worker. It just took me 20 years to figure that part out. I've been asked today to come and talk just a little bit about what we might mean. Is that me? Good, okay. What we might mean by, can somebody show me how to work this? What we might mean by therapeutic child and youth care practice or clinical child and youth care. Which button do I push? This one? Okay, thanks. See, that's the child care approach. When you're stuck, if you ask and you're open and you're willing to be vulnerable, somebody will help you out. That's the way we are. So let me talk about a few of the things that are important to me and in some ways try to just maybe open up our thinking about child and youth care practice just a little bit more. We focus on safety, of course. Child and youth care workers are constantly focused on safety because all children need the experience of safety. They need to feel secure. They need to feel non-threatened. They need to feel that in this moment, I can be safe. And in many ways, this is the essence and the foundation of our practice, but it is certainly not all of it. But CYCs, child care workers, specialize in the creation of contexts of safety. Support. Children need support. They need support where they live their lives as they live their lives. They need to feel the support and the safety in the context in which they live. They need support to heal, to recover, and to grow. And part of our job is to figure out how to create contexts of safety for children where the children live so that they can live in their communities and in their worlds. Children need safe and supportive relationships. Children need to feel safe from others. They need to feel safe to be me. Because so many of the children that we work with don't feel safe to just be themselves in the world in which they find themselves. And they need to feel especially that it is safe to be me in relationship with others. Because for many of them, that has been the place of their pain. Unsafe, hurt, and traumatized in relationships with others. And so what we need to do as child and youth care workers is create experiences of what we might call relational safety. At this moment, in this relationship, with this person, in this context, I feel safe. And that's one of the things child and youth care workers do best. They take this moment and make it a moment within which this child, for perhaps the first time in a long time, feels safe in this moment with another significant person. We help young people build meaningful connections. As we connect with them and we create moments of relational safety with them, we also help them move out and make other connections where they might grow and explore and heal with adults, with families, with peers. They need connections with their community, with their culture, with themselves. Larry Brentro recently said that many of the children with whom we work qualify for the diagnosis of disconnection. They are disconnected from significant others. They're disconnected from those who might love them. They're disconnected from those who might care for them, and unfortunately are often connected with those who might harm them. Part of safety is feeling secure in your connections with other people. And feeling safe in connections with others is part of what gives us the courage to take the steps that we need to take in order to make the changes that we need to make in our life. And we do all of this on a day-to-day basis, and all of this is therapeutic. It's not therapy, but it is therapeutic in the sense that healing from any kind of pain through doing any activity is a therapeutic thing to do. But the therapeutic aspects of child and youth care practice, especially clinical child and youth care practice, go far beyond the meeting of basic needs such as safety and support and connectedness. Child and youth care workers are specialists also in helping young people take the first step that they need to take in order to move forward in the world and live and be and act and do differently. You all have in your conference bags one of these little circles that identify the characteristics of a child and youth care approach that have been gathered from all over the world, amalgamated and brought together as a way to try and define how we work and who we are. And I'm not going to go through them because you have them in your bag, but let me simply say that these have been influenced by people from all over the world, and especially I want to note that they've been influenced by the child and youth care workers of South Africa. And especially in the first quadrant, in the first section, where you see the word love, which we threw out of the field many years ago, and the South African child and youth care workers have helped to bring us back. Howard Bath from Australia said that there are 3 pillars of trauma-informed care, and they are safety, connections, and managing emotional responses, that this is what traumatized children need, to feel safe, to be in connection or in relationship, and to manage their emotional reactions. And you'll have noticed that even in the simple few minutes that we had before, when I was speaking, that we've really, in many ways, covered those first 2, haven't we? The need for safety, it's part of how we are with children. The need for connections, it's part of our belief about how we work and what children need, and so it's there in our everyday. And as for the managing emotional reactions, I'm going to show you in just half a second how good you are at just doing just that. The child and youth care approach, outlined the way it was, covers all these areas. And in clinical child and youth care practice, we are able to help children recover from their trauma experience, to build meaningful and safe connections. We help them to learn to respond differently to their experiences and to live in their world differently, because one of the things that happens for many of the children with whom we work is because of the pain and trauma of their history, they've learned to act in the world in a way that is harmful to themselves or to others. And part of our job is to help them find ways to live in the world that is not harmful to themselves or to others. And we do this through what we call the therapeutic use of everyday life events, and this is the essence of child and youth care practice. Working in the life space of children to help troubled children. Young people and families live their lives differently as they are living it, where they are living it, while they are living it, not isolated somewhere in an edifice or an office, but rather on the streets, in the community, in their homes, wherever it happens to be where they live their lives. And here is a part of how we do it. We are specialists. You are specialists, all of you, in making moments meaningful. You be in that moment with that young person, and in the context of that moment, you help somehow to help the young person and yourself connect that moment to the goals that you have for the future. So if I want to live in the world in a different way, the child care worker helps me realize that if I, in this moment, do this thing, it will be connected to these goals that we've established, and we will take one simple step forward. And we all know that that's how the journey begins. One simple step forward. So we set goals with young people, like perhaps to learn to act more responsibly in the world. And now a moment appears when we just have the opportunity to say hello or introduce them to somebody else. And we ask ourselves the question, how can I use this moment to help this child take one step towards being more responsible, less violent, less whatever, more whatever it happens to be. We use this moment. You use those millions of moments to help young people take one step forward, and using this moment to learn how to live in the world differently where they live. Child and youth care workers are specialists in this. And so every moment of every day, in every interaction with a child, you ask yourself this question, how can this moment help this child take one step forward? Bless you all.
Making meaning or making moments meaningful.
Let's do it together.
Making moments meaningful.
Okay.
Yeah, come again, sir.